identify possible interaction. Okay. There's another poll which is coming up. The project detail requirement should be collected from whom? There are 4 choices. I request you to choose one. The choices are boss, customer, users, project stakeholders. Okay. I guess you can close the poll.
The poll has been closed. You can continue the presentation.
All right. Thank you very much. The poll was, who gives you the requirement? More often, we identify boss or maybe customers and user. These, at least customer and user, are 2 groups which we never fail to miss, let's say. But often we fail to identify people who are outside the core project team, who are indirectly impacted by your project and the wider environment itself. It is important for us to know whom should we talk to in terms of collecting the requirement, and that's the reason why identification is done. Now that we did a stakeholder identification, perhaps the next step would be to sit with them and say, hey, the legal team, tell me what requirements do you have? What is your expectation? What features and functionality would you like the project to have? Or you may sit with the service technician and say, hey, how would you like the assignment to be happening? How early would you like it to happen? What is your requirement? Or you may go and sit with the senior executive and say, what's your expectation out of this project? Or perhaps you may find out the government agencies who are indirectly or who can govern your mobile app, such as reports, environment reports, or usage report, or service reports, or service tax submission reports, so on and so forth. So unless you identify the stakeholders, you will not be able to sit with them and ask for the requirements. That is why this becomes a very critical step in the project management. So one of the first things that happens in project initiation is identify the stakeholders. Find out who your stakeholders are. Once they have been identified, we have used the onion diagram technique to identify. And once they have identified, sit with them, which is a planning phase, and say, hey, we have identified you as important stakeholder. What are your requirements? Can you please tell them? So start making notes. Find out the requirements. Start gathering. There are various ways of gathering the requirement. So one is requirement after the stakeholders have been identified. The other important aspect is the communication itself. Many a project goes really, really well with respect to output or outcome of the project, but then they fail to meet communication requirements. So let's know, after the onion diagram is complete, the next thing we may want to do that, identify possible interaction between these stakeholders. All right, the next slide talks about a sample of interaction. This is an incomplete work of identifying or visualizing possible interaction. Please notice the red ones are the possible interactions. For example, let us say the customer, let's look at the customer here in the wider environment. The customer uses the mobile app and places a request which directly goes to the service contact representative here. So the mobile app is used and it is connected. A request is placed, the request goes to the service contact. So there is an arrow which talks about both the side communication. So the status update goes back to the customer perhaps. So there is a communication happening between these two. Then you may also see that there's a communication, possible communication identified between the service contact center representative and the service technicians to assign them. And similarly, you'll have service team being perhaps possibly talking to the spare parts team for issuance of some spare parts. Then you have a possible interaction between project manager and the software developer and vice versa. And you may also have possible interaction between project manager and the senior executive on reports or on the current project status and so on and so forth, or release of funds perhaps. And then you have sponsor here who may be interacting with the senior executive, the top people, talking about the health of the project. And you may also have legal team directly talking to or visualizing a communication between a court and the legal team. So like this, you will identify the communication visualize possible communication between the stakeholders. Now, how will I benefit? What will I benefit? Simple. I will get to know what communication requirement can be expected in this project. Many projects, we think what we need to communicate is perhaps the status report only, but there are beyond status report. How will I know? By doing this interaction. Now, a service technician with a service contact center, status report may make sense, but a service technician with a software developer status report may not make sense at all. So we have to identify, step one, we have done that. Identified the stakeholder, excellent work. Now we will identify the possible interaction between them. Step number 2 is done. And finally, we will sit with each of these stakeholders or group of stakeholders and find out, hey guys, what is your requirement with respect to communication in specific? Okay, please go back and do this at your project and see if this improves the project communication process itself. All right, let's move on to our next topic. After I have visualized the stakeholder communication that may be possible